This video will show you how to replace the knock sensor on a Mazda 3 with a 2.0 liter engine. This will be mounted to the front of your engine. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. A quick note about replacing the knock sensor: you will have to remove your air intake system, so you want to make sure you have brand new gaskets for that. To start this job, we have the hood in the upright position. We're going to remove the upper engine cover. This is going to be very simple overall. Go ahead and take hold of it and lift it straight up and away. Along the top of the engine here, this is where we can see our air intake system, which is going to be removed from the engine. Along the forward side of the engine is where the knock sensor is going to be located. It's under this area. Let's make sure we clean it up so no miscellaneous debris falls in and behind. To clean this, I'm using some compressed air, especially along the area where the intake is. Now that we have this area cleaned, we're going to start removing the air inlet tube between the air filter housing and our throttle body. Make sure nothing falls inside this area, which might potentially get drawn into the engine as it's running. We want to dislodge this line, which comes from the tube all the way over to the valve cover. You can either dislodge it from our tube or at that valve cover. Now ours is stuck in place and I don't want to cause any damage, so I'm just going to follow it over to the next point. We'll see if it slides off of here a little easier. Now that we have that dislodged, we're going to continue on to loosening these two clamps along either side of this tube. For these, I'm using a 7mm. We only need to loosen them enough that we can move them away from their mounting points. Take hold of this. We'll gently pull it apart. Let's separate that from the throttle body next. This may be stuck in place. You could lightly pry if necessary. Just be extremely careful not to cause any damage. There we are. We'll give that a thorough inspection, make sure it's not damaged in any way. Of course, we are reusing this. We'll set it aside. Now we can see our throttle body. You definitely do not want to press on that butterfly valve inside of the throttle body. This is just a quick note. There shouldn't be any reason you do so anyway. Let's pay attention to the electrical connector next. Now, as far as this electrical connector, it has a locking tab. It's fairly difficult to press in on from here. You can use an angled pick. If you're using an angled pick, you want to come in from along where the wiring harness is. We're going to go approximately halfway down this connector. Then you're going to grab onto the locking tab, gently pull away, and you should be able to slide this out of place. If you need to, you can pry. Just be extremely careful not to cause any damage. Now, once you have that disconnected, you want to try to inspect both sides for corrosion. If you see any, it needs to be taken care of. This looks fine, so I'm going to set this wiring harness aside temporarily. In that same area, you can see that there's a 10mm bolt attached to our throttle body, which holds the bracket holding our upper radiator hose in place. Remove the 10mm bolt. Dislodge the bracket. Now we can see that we have two hoses up along the top of this area. Each one of these hoses has a squeezable clamp. So for those clamps, I'm using some long nose pliers. I'm squeezing in on the locking ears, and then you should be able to dislodge that clamp. When you have that pulled away enough, take hold of the hose and remove it from its mounting point. You may need to twist it to break it free. Once you have a hose dislodged, just give it a quick squeeze. Make sure it's soft and pliable, not torn, worn, or damaged in any way. We'll continue on to the next hose, same process. There we are. That hose looks good as well. We can set both of these aside. We'll move along. Now we are going to make our way down in this area, but let's make a little bit more room by removing our coolant reservoir. As far as the coolant reservoir is concerned, up along the top of the radiator, we can see that we have our overflow hose. Go ahead and dislodge that from the radiator. We'll just take hold of it, give it a slight twist, and pull it out of place. Now along either side of this coolant reservoir, you're going to find that there's locking tabs which are part of the cooling fan. We're going to gently pry on those locking tabs, we'll pull them away, lift up on the reservoir enough that it's dislodged, repeat the process on the other side. Once both sides are dislodged, we'll just go ahead and lift this up and out of position. Now these are fairly difficult to see. One's underneath our upper radiator hose. I've got some movement here. We have a wiring harness that makes its way along the middle of this. Just go ahead and slide it out of place. There's our reservoir. We'll go ahead and set this aside, making sure that we do not spill any of our coolant. Now we have ample room in this area to disconnect our electrical connector, leading to our map sensor. This has a locking tab. Squeeze it in, we'll pull this out of place. Quick inspection for corrosion. You're going to follow that wiring harness down to its next mounting point. Now down in this area, we can see where our electrical wiring harness has a mounting point. Now that mounting point actually has two locking tabs along the back side of the intake tab. To easily squeeze this in and dislodge it, you can use a short 11mm socket. That's going to go directly along the backside. Squeeze in on the two tabs. You should be able to pull this out of place. Once I have it out of there, I'll show you exactly what it looks like. Now you can see those two locking tabs. Let's follow this wiring harness towards the rearward side of the intake next. For this wiring harness, I'm just going to make my way in here with my pry bar, gently pry it away. We're being extremely careful for our map sensor. We don't want to cause any damage to this. Now we're moving up from there to this large wiring harness. We like to have some slack along this area. We have a mounting point here, and then there's a couple more making their way across the upper portion of the intake. We'll start with this clamp first. I'm using an angled pick. We'll make our way along the back side. You're going to find that you have a tab that you want to gently pry out on. Once you're prying out on it, we'll continue on by lifting up on the wiring harness. This should want to dislodge for us. Now you can see where that tab was. To lift it on the other portion, it released from here. Now we'll move along to our next mounting point right along here. For this, I'm using a 10mm socket. We're going to lightly press up against our two tabs along the rearward side there. There we are. Let's make our way across. Same process here. Now we're going to follow these two wiring harnesses downward. Now up along the top area of the intake, for each one of these wiring harnesses, we have some mounting tabs. For these, I'm just going to gently pry them out of place. We're being careful not to cause any damage to that intake. That's the most important part here. If you do happen to break any of your mounting points, you can typically use a wire tie if necessary. This looks fine. Let's go ahead and do the same thing for this one. There we are. We'll continue following this down. We can see an electrical connector. For this, it has a locking tab. We'll go ahead and squeeze it in and pull it out of place. We'll pry this out of place as well. Now there is another mounting point down here. This one's a little bit harder to see. You should be able to move this out of the way. Make our way down in between there to separate it. Now there's two more electrical connectors, one for the alternator and one for the AC compressor. Let's start with the alternator first. This has a locking tab on the inboard side where my index finger is. We're going to attempt to squeeze this in and pull it out of place. We can see where our wiring harness makes its way down to the AC compressor next. As for that AC compressor connector, we have to squeeze in on this area where you can see the two lines directly in the center. Then we can pull this out of place. this out of here. Now, while we're still down in this area, you can see that there's a 10mm bolt all the way down here, and that's holding the lower intake to the engine. So let's start by removing that mounting bolt next. A thorough inspection of our mounting hardware as we continue on. Now we're done under this area. Let's make our way up along the top of the intake next. Now you can see we have a lot of room from this wiring harness. Let's continue on with our mounting hardware. You're going to find that you have 10mm mounting bolts holding this in place. There's one over here next to the throttle body. As you make your way towards the center, there's one in the open up along the top. There's one that you can't see through this port. Continuing over towards the passenger side, we have one on the top and then another one on the far side. It's essentially the same as on the opposite side of the intake. Now for the removal process, we're starting with the outside mounting bolts, making our way towards the center. The center mounting bolts will be the last bolt that we remove, but the first bolt that we install for the installation process. This one over here. As you can tell, that bolt is considerably shorter than all others so far. Let's continue on. There's another short bolt. Another short bolt. Let's make our way into the center. Keep in mind this is the last thing holding this plastic intake in place. Now, as far as that mounting bolt is concerned, typically I just leave it in place in the intake. We can remove it once we have the intake away from the vehicle. Let's take hold of this. We're going to give it a wiggle. There we are. Now, as we start pulling this away, you want to make sure that you do not cause any damage to any wiring harnesses or anything else inside of this engine compartment. Now, as we start pulling this out, there is actually a hose along the bottom of the intake. You can see it right along here. That hose is supposed to connect onto this area here. It's almost impossible to see while the intake's inside of the vehicle. Now, in this area, we can see our intake gaskets. We're going to be removing those and cleaning the entire area prior to installing new gaskets. For now, let's set this aside. Now, that exposes our knock sensor. To remove the knock sensor, we're going to start with our electrical connector. Before dislodging this, pay attention to the orientation of the electrical connector. We can see that this goes down at an angle. During the installation of the knock sensor, we need to make sure we have this in the same exact positioning. This is extremely important. Squeeze in on the locking tab if possible, otherwise you can use an angled pick to get underneath this area, pull up on the locking tab. Either way, we're dislodging this. No corrosion there. We have a 10mm bolt holding this in place. As you remove that, that's the last thing holding this knock sensor on, so we're holding the knock sensor as well. Now you can remove the knock sensor from the engine. There it is, friend. Now that we have the sensor out of there, prior to installing any brand new part, we always make sure we clean and inspect all mounting surfaces. For this particular part, we only have one area here that we have to worry about. I'm going to give it a light scuffing with some fine sandpaper. We don't want to cause any damage, but we do want to remove any miscellaneous debris. At this point, you can tell that I have this cleaned. There's nothing in the way. Let's continue on with the installation of our brand new knock sensor. To install the knock sensor, it's going to be fairly simple overall. We're going to take this sensor and its mounting bolt. Start the bolt through the middle of the sensor. Continue on by installing the bolt into the engine. Prior to tightening this, we need to make sure we have the knock sensor in the proper orientation, and we're going to snug it and torque it to the manufacturer's specifications, which is 15 foot-pounds. Now, as you can see looking at this, the knock sensor is not in the proper orientation. We'll make our adjustments, snug it, and torque it. Now, the torque on this knock sensor is crucial. This is not something that you want to continue on by tightening up with a regular ratchet or, even worse, an impact tool of any sort. Use your torque wrench, make sure it's proper. Now let's get that electrical connector. As far as that's concerned, we're going to align the locking tab ports, lock it in. We heard an audible click. We'll give it a tug to make sure it's properly secured. You do not want this falling off while you're driving down the road. If that's the case, you're going to have to remove your air intake system. Let's continue on with cleaning the engine next. Now up in this area, you can see exactly where our plastic air intake is going to go. Any of this black that you see here is carbon buildup. We don't want to have any buildup or residue. Prior to cleaning this, we don't want anything to fall inside, so I'm just going to insert some rags into each one of these ports to help prevent miscellaneous debris making its way into the engine, which could cause damage. A note about this, you need to make sure you remove all rags and debris from inside of each one of these ports prior to continuing on with the installation of the intake. Let's do the same for all. As you can tell, I protected each one of the areas. At this point, I'm going to continue on with a flat blade razor. You can also use a flat scraper. When cleaning this, we want to be extremely careful not to scratch or mar the engine in any way, which could cause a vacuum leak. The vacuum leak will cause a running condition, and you're going to have an issue. As far as the razor blade, we're scraping away any of the black carbon that we can see around this area, and then we'll clean it out of the way prior to removing any of our protective rags inside of each of the ports. Now, as you can tell, I've fully scraped the entire mating surface. We have no other debris. Once you've completed that, you want to make sure that you remove anything from along the top of these rags that could have potentially fallen along top. For that, just go ahead and use a vacuum cleaner. After you have all those cleaned off, we're continuing on with removing those protective rags from each one of the ports. Make sure that you remove each and every one of them. If you have compressed air, carefully use compressed air inside of each one of these ports, gently blowing in, and that should force out anything that might have made its way into these ports. We fully cleaned the engine, and now we're looking at the back side of the intake. Now, this is the area that goes directly against the engine. In the area that we just cleaned, you can see that we have 3 gaskets. It's always a good idea to replace these gaskets. You should find that you have a tab that you can grab onto and pull them out of place. If you cannot pull them out, you could also carefully use a small screwdriver or pick as necessary. Once you've removed all of them, we're going to continue on by carefully cleaning. Continuing on, we're tipping the intake. We're going to clean along this entire area where the gasket is, but we need to make sure none of the carbon buildup or debris makes its way inside. So we have it tilted with the ports facing downward, not in the opposite direction where everything might make its way in. To clean this, I'm going to carefully use a flat blade razor and lightly make my way across this entire thing. Once I've cleaned the outer portion, I'm also going to try to make my way inside of each of these grooves. And then inside of the ports, typically you will find some carbon. Anything that you can clean from inside of here without getting any type of detergent inside of this is going to be useful. Now, I've used a little bit of carbon cleaner on this. I'm just going to use a bore brush and attempt to make my way around. We're using a soft bristle brush. Now, I've scrubbed this area with my brush. I'm going to use the carbon clean one more time, rinsing this, but once again, we don't want anything making its way up inside the intake. Quick wipe with a clean rag. Filthy. Just double check inside of each one of the grooves where our gasket goes. Now it's time for our gaskets. You want to make sure you have them in the proper orientation. We can see that we have this small bump out, but we also have one little tab. That tab has to fit in its corresponding groove. Each one of these gaskets needs to be properly seated. Line it up, press it in. Double check to make sure it's seated all the way around and repeat the process for all others. Once we've completed that, let's get this back over to the vehicle. I always like to take the hose off of this bottom area. We're going to transfer it directly over onto the area attached to the engine. It's easiest to connect this hose to the intake once the intake's in place. Just go ahead and take hold of that hose. We'll slide it out of place. Now looking at it, you can see that it has to be in the proper positioning for the installation. One port is larger than the other. We'll take that smaller port and we're going to slide it directly onto this area here. Press it on as far as possible. Now this should still be left loose and be able to pivot. We'll continue on with the intake. We have the center bolt in the intake. We'll start bringing this down into position. Now that I have this in an area that I can see in between the intake and the engine, I'm just going to confirm nothing's in between. We'll lift the intake and line up that center mounting bolt. Once we have that started in, we're leaving it loose and we'll continue on to starting in all other mounting bolts. We know for sure we do not have anything inside of those ports. Now as we bring this up into position, it should want to line up perfectly, and we'll start in that center bolt. There we are. Slid right into place up against the engine. Okay. Now I have that snug. I'm going to loosen it just enough that I can still move this around a little bit. We're continuing with our short bolts. The next short bolt goes all the way on the far side towards the passenger side. Now we have our two long bolts. One of the long bolts is going to go all the way over on the driver's side right here next to our throttle body. The next long bolt is the lower mounting bolt. Now we have the upper hardware started in. We're making our way down to the bottom. We'll start in that piece of hardware as well. This is another long mounting bolt. Down along the bottom of the intake, we have our rubber hose. Let's make sure that we secure that. See it right here. It's fairly difficult to reach. Line it up with the intake and press it on there. Now, when you feel as though you do have it pressed on, you want to give it a wiggle. Make sure it's secured in both areas. If it's loose, you're going to have a vacuum leak in a running condition. That feels good. Now it's time to snug and torque all hardware. We need to make sure we do this in a specific sequence. The torque for each one of these mounting bolts is going to be 13 foot-pounds. We're starting from the center, and then we're going to make our way outward. We'll end at the bottom. Now let's get that lower mounting bolt. This is going to be snugged and torqued to that same 13 foot-pounds. Now let's torque it in that same sequence. Make your way down to the bottom. The intake is mounted. It's time to start with our wiring harnesses. We're over towards the passenger side. Now on the passenger side, we want to start with our AC compressor wiring harness first. We'll take that electrical connector and press it in. Listen for a click, make sure it's secure. Making our way up to the alternator next. We'll continue up a little further here. Get that pressed in. There we go. Now we're moving to this wiring harness. This has to be pressed into its corresponding port right along here, as you remember. Just go ahead and line that up, press it in. There we go. Let's get this one in. Now we're back to this wiring harness. We'll press this in. And we have our electrical connector. Line it up, press it on. Just double check everything along this way. Up along the top, we have two more mounting points making their way across. Line it up, press it on. Okay, let's make our way down along the bottom of this area here. We're going to secure our mounting point first. This goes right into the intake. We have our electrical connector. That's going up to the map sensor. Throttle body electrical connector. Back to our wiring harness, we're going to secure that up along the top area. Press it in, make sure that's secured. We have our hoses along the top of that intake. Slide that in. When you install the hose, you need to make sure it's completely bottomed out. I'm going to squeeze the clamp, we'll slide this down and make sure the clamp's in the original positioning. Long nose pliers. It's time for the next hose. Now we're looking at the throttle body. We have the area where the mounting bolt goes. Now what we want to pay attention to is the bracket. We need the mounting bolt port to align with that port on the throttle body itself. At the same time, we need to make sure that the bracket alignment port lines up with the tab. I'm just going to take this and we'll line it up, press it on. Now that I have that on there, let's go ahead and align that mounting bolt port, start it in and snug it up. It's time for the air inlet tube. We're going to take this and slide it onto the throttle body as far as possible. We don't need to tighten the clamp yet. Let's get the other side on as well. Once both sides are completely bottomed out, we'll snug each one of the clamps and continue on with our hose. We're completely bottomed out. We're using our 7mm. We'll make sure these are tight. Take hold of that. Make sure it's properly secured. You do not want any dirty or unmetered air making its way into the engine. We're following the hose all the way over the top of the engine towards that valve cover. Slide it onto the tip of the valve cover there, and we'll make sure that's secured in place as well. Now it's time for our coolant reservoir. Looking at the bottom of this, we have one alignment tab which will fit into the corresponding port on the fans. It's fairly difficult to see, but along either side of this, you will find that you have tabs that protrude out. We want to make sure that those tabs fit into their corresponding areas on the fan as well. Once everything's aligned, just go ahead and press it down. We also have this wiring harness that's just going to fit through this area along the center. We'll come in at an angle. Underneath our upper radiator hose, we're sliding this in, aligning it, and locking it down into those locking tabbed areas. A light tug. Make sure the wiring harness is properly seated along the center, and reattach the hose along the top. This is going to slide right onto the radiator. Double check, make sure that's secured in all ways. One last quick inspection in this area, and let's reinstall our engine cover. As far as the engine cover, you want to try to make sure that you align the ports for your engine oil cap and the engine oil dipstick. Once you have it aligned, press it down. Listen for an audible click from all four corners and a light wiggle. Okay friend, we finished our installation. The next thing you need to do is start up the vehicle and let it run. We're confirming we don't have a running condition and no check engine light. Close the hood and take your vehicle for a road test. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.